The challenge of having to memorize 90 minutes worth of material at 300 bullets a minute really was appealing to me. The idea of spiritually losing myself in a piece and being transported by the words and not stopping to get things right, but just revealing the man. My catchphrases with Billboard magazine was, "I hope the audience really sees him tonight." It was all about exposing Lester and bringing Lester to the world. So in a way, it was a very selfless act, even though I was the only guy on stage. People came to meet him, and if we did our job right on any given night, they did.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Erik Jensen is an actor. I sat down with him at his home in Brooklyn to talk about the work. Do you have a typical way that you like to begin your preparation process when you get a new character? Is there a typical first step that you take when you're trying to wrap your arms around this new person that you have to play?
Well, I'm a big reader, and this is true of me as an actor and as a writer and director. I love reading things around the period. If you look up on this wall here, we have a timeline for one of our projects. And populating the timeline are certain characters at the bottom.
Wow, yeah.
And then you've got what was going on culturally in music and television at the time.
Yeah.
You've got what was going on in this specific location. In this case, it's the Haight-Ashbury. And then we've got a line for what was going on with the police. So this is sort of a top secret series. You can kind of guess maybe in the realm of what it's about. But so that kind of research and these kind of timelines really help me understand, especially if I'm playing an historical figure, what the context is in which I'm working. Yeah. So what I will often do is, if it's a modern day piece, I will often, I won't go as far as a Daniel Day-Lewis and live in a cabin with a wood stove, although that would be a luxury. But I will immerse myself in the audio and television culture at the time. I'll watch a bunch of TV on YouTube of the Milton Berle show or whatever was culturally significant at the time. Even things that I completely wouldn't watch and disagree with, to see what the countercultural reaction to that would be. So I do that research. I read a lot of books. And for this one particular project, I'm reading a half dozen books on the Grateful Dead. I'm reading the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test by Wolf, I guess. And I'm reading a bunch of poetry by Ferlin Getty and all of the San Francisco poets, the Beats. Just to sort of get an underpinning of the language and how people talked then. Yeah. Because how people talked then is very different. The internet is an incredibly useful tool. You can pick up cadences and stuff like that from watching people of the era. Yeah. People talk different. Yeah. And their attitude about talking is different. There was a time as an activist in this sort of 60s world that we're in now, where if you said the wrong thing, it could get you thrown in jail. There was a time in the 60s world we were in, if you came out as queer, you'd get arrested or beat up by the cops. Unfortunately, we're kind of back in that time. And history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure fucking rhymes. Yeah. And so there was this sense of, in the McCarthy era, of having to be careful what you said, be careful who you associated with. Fortunately, none of my artistic community and our artistic circle is at that stage. We're fighting with art. Yeah. But then I decide what my in is, and I'll give you an example. One of the most significant parts that I've had in my career is I got to play legendary Yankee catcher Thurman Munson, number 15, captain of the Yankees. A gruff, uncompromising, complicated, and beloved figure to Yankees fans across the board. That 77 team was one of the last working class teams that before the 80s and steroids and all sorts of other stuff started to make their way in. You really believed that any of these guys could be your next door neighbors, and in some cases they were. But Thurm is an interesting character. You have a certain goal when you're playing a part like that. My goal was to get as accurate a sketch of Thurman as I could, and then I would let people fill in the blanks, because everybody has their own Thurman Munson. And I knew that if I didn't get certain attributes right, it would disappoint a generation of Yankee fans. Not to mention the Teamsters I was working with on set, all of whom were big Thurman fans. So that was opposite John Turturro as Billy Martin and Oliver Platt as George Steinbrenner, and my good friend Daniel Sunyata as Reggie Jackson. So
let's just say also Joe Grafazzi as
Yogi
Berra.
Joe Grafazzi, he is in every film everywhere. He's just like, and he made a great Yogi Berra. Oh my God! But the goal I knew was going to be partially.
First of all, wasn't that a lot of pressure on you though? Like when you're thinking about that, right? What you feel like you have to reach in terms of what you want, but also disappointing people. And then on the set, you have them around you as the Teamsters there. I mean, how'd you deal with that?
Well, I gained 26 pounds for the part. That took a while. While Turturro was trying to lose weight for Billy Martin, we'd sit across from each other at lunch, and it would be a very interesting combination of food on my plate and his plate. So I knew if I got the stats right on the back of his baseball card, I had to up him a little bit because I'm a little taller than him. But if I got most of those stats right and could get a decent batting stance and his catching style, that I would have fulfilled all the physical aspects. And then my belief was in manifesting the physical aspects and totally committing to those, the emotional stuff would follow. Almost the entire body of the character was an emotional word gesture, right? So the only pressure that I got is the first day I came out in the suit, the pinstripes and everything like that with the 15 on the back. I had a bunch of Teamsters who started crying.
Wow.
And there was one Teamster who came up to me and he very quietly and said, you better not fuck this up.
Whoa.
And I took that as a warning, but also as a sign of what was to come from other people. I knew that some people, because they weren't getting their version of Thurman, were inevitably going to be disappointed, and that's just one of those things you have to let go.
Yeah, you gotta let
I
go.
have never acted or written towards the audience. I think it's a disservice to them. I've always acted and written towards the character, and then whatever the audience picks up on the way is what's valuable and important. If I walked around being worried about disappointing people, you're going to disappoint 20% of the public no matter what you do.
Yes.
And the exception might be like a Back to the Future, or a Fast Times at Ridgemont High, or like the number of people who are modestly disappointed in a film are equal to the number of people who completely love it.
That's right.
Playing to the audience is not something that I found to be very valuable on stage or in the film business. Because they can tell. Audiences are smart. And they're getting smarter every year. They're getting more educated about film and cameras. Everybody's on camera now.
Yes.
So they can tell when you're phoning it in. They can tell when you don't know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Unless the character's not supposed to know what they're saying,
Yeah.
So expectations get pretty high, especially with fandoms.
Yeah.
Walking Dead was a high expectation, high bar to meet. How does this character fit into the world? That was just a few episodes, but I wanted to make sure that I was different than any other character who was in there. I wanted to make sure that I was vibing in the world, definitely, but had a different attitude and opinion towards what was going on than anybody else. So that required watching 5 seasons of Walking Dead before I joined up.
Yeah. And how much leeway did you have with something like that? Like, did they give you room to do what you wanted to do with that?
Well, I mean, Walking Dead is sort of like a big battleship, and it's awfully hard to turn the battleship.
Yeah.
And and I'm very good friends with Scott Gimple, who's the showrunner of the Walking Dead universe. And he, on the first day that I was there, was like, look, this is going to change your life a little bit. He gave me the speech about non-disclosure, blah, blah, blah. So that was good. But it was good to hear from him that no matter what I did, there were going to be haters, there were going to be cheerleaders, and so to not worry about what I did so much, and just stay true and be honest.
Yeah.
And I was an honest liar. That character was a liar. And it's one of the hardest things to do as an actor is to lie effectively, because it's a lie on top of a lie, right? I'm not really a doctor. I'm pretending to be one. That's one lie.
Yeah.
But then it was a doctor who lied.
Right.
So it's two levels of lying that you're sort of dealing with. And am I an effective liar, or am I a bad liar? Can people tell that I'm telling the truth or not? Again, I just find something to grab onto, and that's a puzzle for me.
Yeah.
And if I'm working that puzzle through shooting and the end of production, that's a successful part.
Right. You don't have to come up with the solution. Right?
Most of the time, we don't know what our objective is. Most of the time, we as human beings don't know what we want.
Right.
And so, I gave myself 10 possible different things that I could want, came in with my lines totally memorized, came in prepared, and then figured whatever happened on set, I was prepared with 10 possible different choices, any of which could be viable, or all of which I would throw out, depending on what a director like Ernest Dickerson said to me. And so,
I've never heard that before. I think that's interesting. Coming in with possible wants and then being able to shuffle through them based on what you're given.
Right. Yeah.
And then go fully with whatever one. I mean, as long as it's built out for you enough with each one.
Yeah, I don't set anything. I have a Rolodex.
Yeah.
And I flip through the Rolodex and see if any of the choices that I made match up with what they've done. But because I have a Rolodex and always have 10 different choices, that's made me very versatile in being able to change to a choice on the spot.
You're a true multi-hyphenate. What came first, though, for you? Were you writing before you were acting? Were you directing before you were acting? Were you acting before all of this?
I was reading comic books before I was acting and imagining myself in different worlds. I was reading Kurt Vonnegut. I was reading Solzhenitsyn. Do you know Solzhenitsyn, the Russian Gulag Archipelago, and One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. These were very important books to me, where I could imagine myself in different worlds. A lot of science fiction, which had kind of broad world-building stuff in it, but with work like stuff by William Gibson and stuff like that, also very cool character studies. So the first, before I showed an interest in acting, I showed an interest in comic books and literature, and then I did a community theater play with my parents. I didn't book the lead, but I booked kind of a second kid lead in it. And
were your parents actors?
No, they were amateur actors. My dad was also an amateur writer, and my mom was actually quite a good actor. Did various musicals together in this little community theater called Playhouse 412 in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. There's some very embarrassing pictures floating around of me in very heavy makeup as a 12-year-old. Because we didn't really know how to do anything subtle. But they would bring in directors who were professional directors, people who graduated University of Minnesota, or people who had been to Carnegie Mellon or Juilliard or whatever, and they would direct the plays for our little community theater. And we did the standards. We did Oklahoma. We did The Music Man. We did Arsenic and Old Lace. We did South Pacific, which would never get produced now because it was a lot of Midwestern brownface, which is offensive, but in hindsight was kind of the norm at the time, unfortunately. But the desire to do good work and the vibe that you got when you were riding the lightning of audience reaction was the same as anything that I experience now. So I learned some sort of tricks and skill sets very early on, which when I got to Carnegie Mellon had to be beaten out of me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I started off with my parents. My dad would direct a little bit sometimes. I watched my dad. I helped my dad memorize lines. I found the whole process fascinating. And then at the same time, I was doing community theater in the summers. I started doing plays at school, and then I ended up. My parents got divorced, and I ended up moving around a lot. I had a very tumultuous and abusive childhood, and was looking for that bliss that I found with a theater community again, and. My mom got remarried, and I moved to this town called Apple Valley, Minnesota. It's a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there was this remarkable theater teacher there named Dennis Swanson, and another guy named Kim Waltman, and a woman named Joni Anker, who ran the speech department, which I did too, who really saw that I was a troubled youth, and used a lot of recovery language and 12-step language, because they had both of my teachers had experienced that language before. I'm not outing anybody. And Denny died in a tragic car accident a few years ago. I miss his counsel, and I miss his coming to things. But they used a lot of 12-step language with me, which was new. Things like a day at a time, invest in the process. They were giving me a moral kind of structure on which to make my choices as an artist, but also providing me with the material that I needed to have an organized mind instead of a disorganized one, which is a thing that often happens when you're being abused.
Yeah.
So these teachers really took me under their wing as much as they could. And my dad, of course, found it very threatening. And there's an interesting story that I have to kind of explain my dad, and because it was clear from the get-go that I was going to probably be pretty successful, because I did have that stage thing that sometimes people really have to work for, and I had a thing that kind of automatically clicked into place. There was something that I understood about talking to and listening to an audience that was just an innate skill, and it probably comes from being, all my uncles were great storytellers, so I took whatever they were doing and applied it to the stage, and it really clicked. And so I think very early on, my dad especially was very threatened by what I was bringing to the table, both as a writer and as an actor. And one day, he went in for a conference with my teacher, Denny Swanson. And after the conference, he came back and said, "Hey, I just want to tell you something. We've done community theater together, and I just wanted you to know how I got interested in theater." And I was like, "Okay, how?" And he said, there was a production of Arsenic and Old Lace or something, but there was a dinosaur in it, and it was... And he said, then, I was goofing off in the hallway one day in high school, and, because I was on the basketball team and stuff like that. And I had this free period, and I was goofing off. And this teacher came up behind me and grabbed me by the neck and said, "We need somebody tall for our production of Skin of Our Teeth. And we would like you to play the dinosaur." And he was like, "I don't want to be in a play, that's like, weak." And she was like, "Well, you're going to be in the play, and you're not going to goof around in the hallways anymore." And my dad said, he played the dinosaur and got lots of laughs, and he said it was over from that point on for him. Well, many years later, my dad had died already, and my teacher got in this horrible car accident, and I went to his funeral. And the teacher's son, Jeremy, got up, and he said, "I want to tell you how my dad got into theater." And he said he was goofing off in the hallway one day, because he was on the football team or the baseball team, and he had a free period. And they were doing Skin of Our Teeth. And the teacher came up and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and said, "We need a dinosaur." And, for my dad, from there on out, it was all over. All he wanted to do was theater. And I'm listening to this at the funeral, and of course, I'm having the experience of mourning my teacher first and foremost, but this is a second part of me that's like, oh my God, my dad lied to me.
Wow.
Because he so wanted to be close to me.
Wow.
After all of the abuse and stuff like that, he wanted to connect.
Yeah.
And all he could do was steal a story from another person. How sad is that?
Wow.
And it gave me a lot of perspective into the man, but it also gave me a lot of perspective into sort of imposter syndrome and to not give into that, you know. And that's why I'm a true hyphenate and can manage all of those different hats.
Yeah.
Now, for a long time, working on films with people like Walter Hill, the director who directed The Warriors, is responsible for the Alien movies. George Romero, of course, who everybody knows. David Fincher, Sam Esmail, Carl Franklin, Ernest Dickerson. Working with all these guys showed me, I was studying with them as I was working with them. I was asking questions about camera angles, probably to some people's frustration because we had a job to do and I didn't quite know my lane. But working with these guys, I really learned what my lane was, and I learned how to sort of sidle in with questions and stuff like that when something really interesting was happening with either the scene or the cameras. Why are we doing this here? A guy named Michael Lehman, who directed Heathers, but also directed Hudson Hawk. You know what I mean? Like, why are we doing this here? Why are we doing this now? How come we're starting in close-ups and then moving out to the wide? And so those guys became my teachers, and I glommed onto them as mentors because, you know, my mentors were far away, and I needed new ones. I needed new knowledge. And a guy named Jeremy Kagan, who directed a movie with Robbie Benson called The Chosen, and it was about a Jewish kid in New York, I believe, who was part of the Hasidic community. And
I think I remember this.
Yeah, it was all. It got nominated for like an Oscar and stuff like that. I mean, it was a really fine film, and decided to become. Again, I don't know what the different kinds of. He decided to become a conservative rather than Hasidic, and cut his forelocks off, and it was a big deal in the family. Max von Sydow was in it. So you know, for 2 years, I had dinner with Jeremy Kagan, and every night was a film class. He teaches film at UCLA, so we would talk about Les Enfants du Paradis, the Children of Paradise, for 2 hours about the benefits of it. And then we would go in the back room and watch it. We would talk about Chuck Jones and Bugs Bunny and how that's an extension of Commedia dell'arte. We would talk about all these things. So I found listening to these men and women who knew so much more than I did. Mary Harron, who did American Psycho, and I Shot Andy Warhol. She's a good friend and a true mentor. As long as I kept my radar dishes open, I was collecting information for my next project and finding inspiration from people who had come before. They paved the way for something important, and I wasn't about to waste my opportunity. You know, I've never gained anything by aiming low.
That's huge. I've tried many times to collaborate with people, and I just can't do it. I'm talking about writing. Were you inclined to collaboration before you met Jessica, or was that something that clicked because of that person?
Well, for some sense of context, I guess, my wife and I first became well known for writing a play called The Exonerated, which ran off Broadway for 2 years, over 600 performances, 620 some performances. And, you know, starred everybody from Susan Sarandon to Delroy Lindo to Mia Farrow to a couple of the guys from MASH. And it was like, it wasn't conceived of as an activist piece of theater. My wife had asked me out on a date to go to a death penalty conference. This is early on where
you have to be a certain type of guy for her to offer that.
And you also have to say yes because she's so pretty and so smart and so engaging. And I really wanted to be in good with her, so I would have said yes to knee surgery, you know. And And so she brought me to this death penalty conference, and these stories were being conveyed. And I had been friends with Moises Kaufman and been a reader for him, and was very interested in what Tectonic was doing with documentary theater. Their form of it was different from what I was going to do, but it was very, they were breaking ground. They were breaking new ground in this decade. People like Emily Mann had preceded us. Emily with a play about Harvey Milk and the trials in San Francisco, using newspapers and interviews and things like that to do things, and then like important plays like Fires in the Mirror, doing a similar thing about things that were going on in Los Angeles. These were the people who preceded us, who paved the way. And then Moises was doing something entirely different with Laramie Project. And so we're in this room and we're listening to all of these, cases of a group of guys called the Death Row 10, who were guys in Chicago who had their confessions, in quotes, tortured out of them by a commander named John Burge, police commander, using techniques that he learned in Vietnam to hurt but not cause overt bruising. Electrodes to the genitals, phone books, hitting people through phone books, and convinced 10 young African-American men to confess. And there was no other evidence against most of these guys except for their confessions. But he was so convinced they were guilty, even though they were not, that he, by whatever means necessary, beat the confessions out of them. One guy even scratched with his fingernail torture under the bench that he was in, so there was some proof left behind. He thought he was going to die, and he wanted proof left behind that he had been there and that there was something terrible going on. Well, this guy was eventually fired with pay from the Chicago Police Department, found to have done this. A lot of these guys are now had their sentences fixed and are out of prison now. But there was an interview with one of them at this death penalty conference, and it was very moving. Within 2 minutes, everybody was in tears. And I turned to Jessica, and sort of Minnesota cynic that I am, it's a special kind of cynicism. It's a passive-aggressive cynicism. And I was like, yeah, this is all good, but everybody here is already on the right side. And everybody here is a minister or a nun or an anti-death penalty activist or an activist for human rights. They all buy into these stories and hear these stories all the time. This is a rah-rah cheerleading episode for us, and we are preaching to the converted. What needs to happen is these stories need to get out to audiences that wouldn't expect that they'd be moved or agree with this side of things, who aren't exposed to this side of things because of the way our media works, right? Yeah. And so we immediately then started doing sketches on a piece of paper, writing notes to each other in class, which we shouldn't have been doing. We should have been paying attention, but we were so excited and so moved and felt this incredible wind at our sails and this sense of purpose that I sketched out a stage of a radio play with a single light bulb above it. And I was like, look, people could sit in these. We could do music stands so people wouldn't have to get off book. We could rotate in various members from the acting community who maybe wouldn't have time to memorize something, but could do an educated stage reading like that. And then we went off to do all the interviews, and we had accomplished, I think we did 40 on the phone and 20 in person. Once we had about 8 or 10 viable interviews transcribed and worked on, and then we had started workshopping with actors, we brought it to Bob Balaban. There is 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon completely fades in the presence of Bob Balaban. It's 2 degrees of separation. You are always 2 degrees of separation away from Bob Balaban. And he had directed me in a play. He was directing me in a TV show. And when it came time to do the TV show, the second episode of the TV show he was directing, I brought him the script and I said, Bob, can we have lunch and talk? And I pitched him what we were doing and said, we'd like you to direct. We don't quite know what we're doing, but there's readings here, definitely. And he read it. And he then called us about a week later and said, I have some friends I'd like to show this to. And we said, great. And a week later, he called us back and said, Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon are going to do the reading. And that changed everything. It changed the caliber of actor that we were going to bring in for the reading. It changed the tenor of what we were doing. It changed media visibility. And so during the 2000-ish elections, it was the one where it was Gore Bush and nobody knew who was going to be president over a month.
Yep.
We staged 3 readings because Bush had killed more people in Texas with the death penalty than had been killed in the entire country.
Wow.
The death penalty was at the forefront of the of the national conversation, and we really wanted to be a part of that. And those readings garnered enough interest from papers like the Times and other people, other media outlets, that we decided that we would do a fully staged version of it. So in terms of writing, this is the long answer to your question. My interest, I had always written in secret, but my public-facing writing did not happen until I met my wife while I was doing a play with Arthur Kopit at Manhattan Theater Club. And I met her, and she said, "You can write, you're a good writer," because she secretly looked at all my stuff that I had written privately for myself, and bad screenplay, a couple other things. And she said, "You really can write, you just need some structure, so let's hit the road and let's do this." And she had something that I lacked. She had follow through. And so I needed to learn follow through from another mentor in a relationship of equals. It's a big deal. Saying I have a great idea and saying I'm going to do this thing and then actually doing it. There's a huge chasm between those things. And you're going to either walk down the chasm and walk up the other side, or you're going to cross a bridge, or you're going to swim over a river. And sometimes just that journey ahead of you, when you look at it, it stops you. Because there's no way I'm going to go all over the country and interview these 20 people. We can't afford it. Yeah. Well, the wind was really at our backs for that. We found funding almost immediately. We got $8,000 from a foundation called the New World Foundation to travel the country and interview people. And sometimes we slept in our car. And the interviews were some of the most eye-opening things. They changed my politics, they radicalized me, and made me more compassionate about other people's circumstances.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And also signaled a shift in me as an artist, that I could be more than just an actor.
Yeah.
And weirdly, more acting jobs started coming because I was actually listening. I learned to listen by doing those interviews.
That is huge.
It's a big deal.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
When you are turning people's actual words into drama, how does that affect you as an actor dealing with text?
I would contend, not to disagree with you overtly, but let me be subversively disagreeable.
Yeah.
I would contend, first of all, that everything is documentary theater. Everything that Tennessee Williams ever wrote, that Arthur Miller ever wrote, Beckett, it's documenting something. Now, maybe it's just their thoughts, or maybe it's a piece of their childhood or whatever, but it's all documentary theater. And that everybody, if you talk to them long enough, has some aspect of their story that's compelling and dramatic. So the drama's there already. You do feel a certain obligation to get as a writer, as a collaborator with the person that you're interviewing, you do feel an obligation to get the story right, which is why we have all of our stuff fact-checked by, I think the last book that we did was fact-checked by somebody who fact-checks for Vanity Fair. And all of the plays are fact-checked too. So like you want to make sure that your T's and I's are crossed and dotted that way. And you also have an obligation because you're taking the worst parts of somebody's life that have ever happened to them, and you're putting them on stage in the public. And further, we have a rule that we don't chase down people who don't want to talk. Like, we are interested in people who enthusiastically want to share their stories. And that's kind of our main rule. We don't want to beat people into submission or force them to tell their stories, and that's just not how we operate. We feel that's a real disservice to the overall story. But there is an obligation when you're acting it to give a slight impression of the person that you're doing, but really, other than that, to really stay out of the way. Like, if you can find a vocal cadence or a physical thing. But it's interesting. People live in their words, and these actors who we insisted not listen to recordings for first parts of Exonerated, we just had them do the words, and all of a sudden these little tics and physical things would come out, and Jessica and I would stare gape-mouthed at each other, being like, "Oh my God, that happened during the interview," and we realized how much psychology is in people's bodies through the words, about how language. In this situation, language first was prompting the body to move or to do something, or for somebody to uptalk.
Right.
And so people found all of these things that were already there in the language, and we realized how much of our psychology is in language at that point. So I think the best thing when you're doing documentary theater is not to try to gild the lily. It's just to present what's there. It's kind of a just the facts kind of thing. Allow the audience to have their own emotions. Don't push it on them. Now, there's different pieces that call for different emotional levels. There was our best play that we've written so far was a play called Coal Country that we created with Steve Earle, based on interviews we did with the families of 29 miners who were killed in a completely avoidable explosion in West Virginia. People at the company had, eaten the fines that the government was giving them rather than fix the problems, because you're pulling millions and millions of dollars off a coal wall every day, and what's a $10,000 fine? It's just better to eat the fine and not fix the actual problem, which might cost $50,000 to fix.
Right.
So this avoidable coal explosion happened, and 29 men were incinerated. Wow. And that spoke to me as a labor person. It spoke to me coming from the working class background that I came from in Minnesota. It spoke to me, my grandfather and my uncle were farmers, not as dangerous as coal mining, but still a very dangerous profession. Met a lot of farmers who didn't have fingers and, or were lacking a limb, and stuff like that because they fell into a thresher or something like that. So dangerous labor has always fascinated me because my family was always doing dangerous labor. They were physical laborers. I was the black sheep of the family going into the arts. And so I felt like any of these guys who died could have been my uncle, my cousin, my neighbor. And they all lived in a small town, just like the town of 8,500 people I grew up in northern Minnesota. And I felt real compassion for them and for their families, and real anger at what had happened to them, and how the deunionization of that area led to the loss of life. And
that's a lot of passions, right? I mean, meaning
so
that fueled it.
Well, it was a better play because there was a lot of anger fueling it.
Right.
And that's one of the times where one of our subjects we allowed to kind of fully come out with an angry screed about what he wanted to do, how he wanted to see justice administered, and we felt the obligation to fully express his opinion in the same way that he had expressed it to the press and to media outlets and to us.
And so do you get to a point where when you realize, research is such a huge part of the work, do you then just say, well, let me dive into Lester Bangs and have a good time?
Well, I mean, even the Greeks, when they did their Dionysus festival, they had 3 tragedies and a comedy, right?
Yeah.
So we'd written 3 tragedies,
Yeah.
and all were New York Times critics picks, which was good, and all got really well received and had their lives. But over the course of working on all 3 of these plays, we had been in contact with the Lester Bangs estate. And,
all that while?
Starting with Aftermath. Wow. It was there was a 1.5 year long wooing process, but where we went down to meet them where John Morthland, Lester's estate manager, I guess, lived in, I'm trying to say, it was Austin, Texas. But fortunately, the weekend that I met him, there was a production of Exonerated in Austin, which he went to see to check up on us, to see.
Yeah.
And from after seeing that, he was like, "You guys are the guys." And so we got access to Lester's entire published and unpublished writing.
Wow.
His entire catalog, including a lot of letters and things that had never seen the light of day.
Wow.
and a lot of poems, a lot of, I have a whole book of Lester poems here that have never been published that are really beautiful, song lyrics and things like that. So that's a project I want to do someday. But, I went through the mimeograph machine, the copy machine, all onion skin paper, typewritten pages, that you could smell the bookworms in them, and had to copy thousands and thousands of pages over the course of 3 days, hand-fed into the machine because they were very brittle. And so I had a very analog relationship with Lester. I had an adolescent relationship with Lester too. When my parents got divorced, my cousin had Rolling Stone and Cream magazines. And this was right around the time where Lester was back at Rolling Stone. There was a period of, 6 months or a year where he was back. But these old Cream magazines with Lester's work in it too. And it was very compelling for me. I felt like there was a writer talking about something that I cared about, definitely writing for me, the fan, the 14-year-old, but not talking down to me. Meeting me as an equal. And, even my favorite writers weren't necessarily doing that, with the exception of Vonnegut maybe. And Hunter Thompson, although I was a little young to be reading Hunter. So I had been always moved by Lester's work, and obviously very deeply moved by the greatest actor of my generation, Phil Hoffman, playing him in Almost Famous. And we decided to turn it into a one-man play. Jess would direct. I starred as Lester. And we started off at a couple of smaller theaters in Los Angeles, the reviews of which got us another couple of productions in LA, big one at the big theater in LA. And then we got invited by Steppenwolf to bring Lester to Chicago. Those reviews garnered us more interest from New York, and finally, as part of the Public Theater's Fringe Festival, we were able to mount a decent full production of Lester here in New York. And Lester, I've always been fascinated by criticism, about what compels people to criticize, and whether it's helpful. I've always been fascinated by mile-a-minute drug taking and how that affects the creation of art. I'm a huge music dork. I have forgotten more about music than most people will ever remember. And it's one of these things, how people can memorize baseball stats. I weirdly can memorize what guy was in what band during what year and who he replaced, what studio albums were recorded in. I have this encyclopedic thing that happens up through about 1988, and then I start to lose interest.
And this is just rock or jazz too, or
rock, jazz. Not so much classical, punk, new wave, blues.
So you must have just loved the idea of diving in with this guy who crosses so many things for you in terms of interest.
At this point in my life, I'd realized that a lot of our psychology and movement is in our words, and it was physicalizing the words that became the goal, but using muscle memory to remember where I was at during particular points of the one-man piece. Because keep in mind, this isn't a one-man piece where the janitor comes in the middle and we have a conversation to sort of relieve the tension of the one-manness. It was just me up there by myself as a soloist. And I don't believe in the word monologue. I think there's no such thing as a monologue. I think there are only dialogues, and sometimes they're a little one-sided.
I like that.
And you're either dialoguing with God or with a particular member of the audience or with the memory. And when people say monologue or my speech or whatever, it totally turns me cold. You're missing the point altogether. That means you're not listening. And that's an important part of a duologue, which is what it really is. But, the challenge of having to memorize 90 minutes worth of material at, 300 bullets a minute really was appealing to me. The idea of spiritually losing myself in a piece and being transported by the words and not stopping to get things right, but just revealing the man. My catchphrases with Billboard magazine was, I hope the audience really sees him tonight. It was all about exposing Lester and bringing Lester to the world. So in a way, it was a very selfless act, even though I was the only guy on stage. People came to meet him, and you know, if we did our job right on any given night, they did.
And now you're trying to make it into a movie, right?
Michael Chernis is going to play Lester in the movie.
Nice. And you have a movie that's about to come out that I've seen in like a preview almost, called Brooklyn, Minnesota.
Yeah.
Which I didn't realize that this was kind of a personal story in a way.
Yeah.
And now you have your daughter in the film. And
Yes.
it's a true family affair now.
Yeah. Yeah. She's decided to join the family business after years of saying she didn't want to do it.
Is that right?
Well, Brooklyn, Minnesota was a very interesting project because I had an idea in my head that I wasn't quite, I wanted to talk about my family and about my experience growing up without directly talking about, like, because abuse dramas are hard. Like I'm trying to remember the Robert De Niro with the boy. Yeah. I found that incredibly difficult to watch. And it's a movie that I watched once and I can't watch again.
Yeah.
So I wanted to address some of the same issues, and from my perspective, from a Midwestern perspective, from a place where people deny that that's actually going on when it's happening, which is all too common, unfortunately. You know, and I had intentionally not gone to my father's funeral when he died tragically. I think because he'd been drinking. He fell down some stairs and broke his neck, and we're not sure whether he had a heart attack on the way down or whether it was the neck thing that killed him. And at least that's my understanding of it. Nobody's given me a real straight story on any of it. But it was very sad, and he died alone, like we all do. And I decided that I wasn't going to go to the funeral because I was incredibly disrespected by that portion of my family. And then after that, I wouldn't say I felt guilt, but I felt a sense of curiosity. Like, what would have happened had I gone to the funeral and gone home? Like, would I have confronted people with their active participation in my abuse? Was I in that mood? Would that have been a selfish thing to do while people are in grief and mourning a person that mattered a great deal to them, maybe mattered less to me? Would I be getting in the way of my own potential grief by doing that? So I imagined that, and then we went on vacation with some friends and I back pocketed it. I was like, well, if this is supposed to happen, it'll happen, but I can't think of anything else right now. And then we went on vacations with some friends who fortunately had a place in Italy on Lake Como. We were like down the road from George, you know, and we were out in a boat one day and we were talking about wanting to make a movie in Minnesota because he had some production contacts there. And then we had lunch and we started talking about what the movie could possibly be. And then him and I went for a hike. And during our 7-hour hike in the mountains around there, we came up with the entire story. And we figured out beat by beat. We did a beat sheet while we walked. Wow. What the story was going to possibly be. And we decided there was going to be a widowed dad and his daughter living this very bubbled life in Brooklyn, and that and he had lied to her and said that his parents were dead to make things easier so they wouldn't have to go back. And then his dad actually dies and they have to go back for the funeral. And of course she's pissed at him for lying to her for so many years. And like, look, Brooklyn and rural Minnesota are very different places. Yeah. And especially if you're a kid, the rules are different. The environment's different. The way you rebel is different. So we wrote this part for Sadie and then asked Sadie kind of after the fact, hey, would you want to do this movie? And she said, yeah, I'll do it. And it was sort of as a favor. She's like, I'll try it, you know? And so she'd never been on screen before. Two of the other cast members, the woman playing my sister and the person playing the probate attorney, had never been on camera before. So this was 3 major characters in the piece were new to the filmmaking process. But, you know, Cassavetes did this all the time. That's right. So I felt a great deal of confidence that they'd all rise to the occasion, and that Jess and I were good enough directors to pull performances out of them. We didn't have to do anything. We just stayed out of the way.
And they did.
And because the cast was all our friends plus Amy Madigan, things just magically happened. I watched my daughter go toe-to-toe with an Oscar nominee.
Yeah.
And I watched Amy teach Sadie how to hit a mark. And I watched Amy teach Sadie how to deliver a subtle performance after doing something too big. And it just was this beautiful give and take within the course of the film. We shot in like 22 or 23 days.
Wow.
And it was very effective, got given a lot of things by the local community. We're very supported by the news media there. And then we finished shooting in 2 days before we were going to do the last shot in Minnesota. I had an incident. There was some blood in my stool, and we thought it was like hemorrhoids or something like that, or maybe I'd had a blood vessel burst, because all of my scans and stuff that I'd done previous to that had been clear. And I hadn't been in like a year and a half or whatever, but we weren't worried about it being anything. We thought it was just a hemorrhoid thing, and we would get lasers and fix it and whatever. And then, so we said, okay, you know what, proctologist, 2 days when we get home. And so I went to the proctologist, and the guy said, you have stage 1 cancer. And then the next day, the new person that I went to at Memorial Sloan Kettering said it's actually stage 3. And then another doctor came in who was the cancer doctor, and he said, I'm sorry, Mr. Jensen, it's stage 4.
Wow.
And I was like, what is stage 4? And he says, it's spread from your colon to your liver. And we don't know how you're going to respond to the treatment, so prepare yourself. Once I got over the shock of that and started chemo, we realized we had a film to cut. So what I would do is I would go do chemo in the morning over at MSK, and then I would come take a nap here, and then our wonderful Gordon Grinberg, our wonderful editor, moved down here into the office and moved his rig here. And so me and Jessica, I would sit shivering in a chair, and me and Jessica would edit the film with him for the next 6 or 7 hours. Then I would go to sleep, get up the next morning, do chemo, come back. I wouldn't recommend it as an improver of art, but I got to tell you, the experience that I was having with the potential that I was dying, and the potential that this film, Brooklyn, Minnesota, might be my last project, made me put a lot of care into the edit. I became less controlling. I became freer. My heart opened up because I love my daughter very dearly. And I wanted to make sure the silences between us worked. It wasn't a like, let's cut from the next thing to the next thing. There was a lot of patience that fell into it. And of course, it made for a better film. And I was proud of it. And then, another year's worth of work, and now I'm free and clear. I've been declared no evidence of disease. My blood work is clear. All my scans are clear. So I'm basically cured. I'm doing a little round of what they call cleanup chemo now to make sure that we don't have anything microscopic there. We want to avoid a relapse. But yeah, I went from very dire circumstances where I was going to die to being as healthy as you are.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So and the film, having a piece of art to get up for every day saved my life. Art can save your life. I'm a testament to that.
I believe that.
It saved my life.
So I always say, like, and I say it more and more, that acting is one of the only things I could think of where, no matter what happens in your life, it benefits the craft.
Yeah.
And would you say that that's true, though, for something even as scary and as life-changing as what you went through?
You can say the
or
word.
Is it even more?
As cancer?
Yeah.
You can say the word. It's okay. It's not a scary word.
Cancer. But you also had a brain aneurysm.
Yeah.
Mainly when I think about that, I think about heartbreak, and I think about betrayal. But is that sitting there thinking you're going to die? Does that actually benefit the work too?
Yeah. Time is on fire. It benefits the work, and when I'm like, I don't know if I want to write today, for me saying, I'm writing for 2 hours today, I'm writing for 3 or 4 hours today to get this truth that I'm wrestling with across, or to get this truth I suspect is a truth across, or to get this question across. And it really makes you wrestle with big issues. In the case of the comedy that's coming up, it made me funnier. Because, once you have something like this, once you face death twice with two different things, your sense of humor, if you're lucky, is your safety valve. I have a whole pocket full of brain aneurysm jokes. I have a pocket full of cancer jokes that are just for me. That's not everybody's path, but it was mine. I found having some humor about it really put people at ease once they got over the shock of me saying the joke. This is life that we go through together. It made me a more open-hearted person. It made me less judgmental of other people. It made me accept that, hey, there's people on the subway. There were so many people at Memorial Sloan Kettering that had cancer that you never would have guessed had cancer that were struggling with that. Now, there could have been a whole subway car of people on that train up on the way up there that could have been wrestling with cancer. You don't know what a person is going through at a particular moment. So it made me cut people more slack. I got in less arguments in New York City, which are fun to get into, but really not. And it made me gentler with my family. It made me give actors room on set to express themselves, to find the lines themselves, rather than providing them with the answer right away. It took urgency out of the equation, weirdly. Even though you'd think, oh, well, hurry up because I could die. No, I took that out of it, It made me prioritize also, who did I want to spend my artistic time with? And I hadn't made some very wise choices about that over the course of my time here, especially in a couple of theater situations. I stuck around in some very abusive situations that I knew were wrong, that everybody around me knew were wrong, and needed to leave. But, my Midwestern stick-to-itiveness says never quit, there's always a solution. And sometimes when you have a disease like this hit you upside the head from out of nowhere, you start to go, well, what is my time worth? And you start to be able to say, at what point do I walk away? And is that okay? And the answer came back a resounding yes. I'm in a situation now where, with this project that we're putting together, I'm actually interviewing people to be involved on a larger level. Usually you think of it as you're going hat in hand with people, please invest in our movie. But we're actually in a situation now with this film, because the readings have gone so well, that we can we want to pick a good financial team for it, rather than us just having our hats in our hands and, because it's a bigger budget. But that means working with bigger people who want more of a say. And so, who are those people going to be? When they show up on set, are they gonna interfere? Because if they're going to interfere, we don't want them to be part of the team. But if they're going to stay out of the way and give us wise counsel, that's a whole other story. Right. So, I prioritize everything differently now after having a deadly disease. I love my daughter more. I love my wife more. I love my friends more. So many people came out to help me who are part of the conspiracy now, who were casual friends before, but they showed up every week. Joe Marsh Garland, one of the best actors of our generation, Orange is the New Black, and various other things. Joel came over weekly and played cribbage with me, played a card game with me every week. And we had never hung out that much up until then. He came to be of service to me and keep me happy. And it worked, So it's a debt I can never repay. So I want to spend as much time with that guy artistically as I can. Because he lightens the set. He brings light to things, you know?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Erik Jensen, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
All right. I hope it was helpful. I hope it's helpful to somebody out there. I just want to be inspiring and let people know that it's never over, that there's always something around the corner, and that faith can drive a lot of what you do.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.